Hello, RWorld. Welcome back to another episode of RWorld Talk. I am your host, Chris Kresman, and this morning we are lucky enough to be joined by Mr. Jim King. Jim, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate the invite.
So, Jim, you're from IOA, which is the Insurance Office of America.
That's correct.
Certainly a hot button item that everybody in the state of Florida wants to hear about, because a lot's been changing with insurance. We've had new insurance legislation. We've had lots of changes to the carriers that are and are not operating in the state of Florida at the moment. So it's what's on everybody's mind. It's definitely something that everybody wants to talk about. But why don't we get started this morning by you telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you got started in this business.
Okay, sure. So born and raised Palm Beach County, third generation. So initially, we got into the GC world, so I had a lot of construction background.
Okay.
So in 2003, when I got into insurance, property it just was very simple to be able to understand the inspections, talk to the inspectors, and be able to relay it to the clients seemed to fit really well. So I've been doing insurance now. My first license was 1999. So
Okay.
So I've been doing it. It's been a lot of changes.
Couple of years.
And but no, I love it. I love it.
Okay, wonderful. It's certainly rare that we've got somebody on the show who is a third generation native Floridian.
Yeah, my father and I both born at Good Sam.
Okay,
Oh.
fantastic. Well, let's talk about the state of the market.
Okay.
Obviously, lots changing, as we've already said, but commercial and residential insurance both has finally started to move a bit in the right direction. Why don't you tell us, in your opinion, what's contributed to that? Or are we starting to see some benefits from the bills that passed over 22 and 23, or is there other factors at play here?
I mean, that's a majority of it. So when you take a look at all of the shortening down of the statutes to be able to limit the amount of time, someone's able to put a claim in. What people have to understand is that reinsurance companies, when they're looking at investing into an insurance carrier, because just like we have insurance, so does the insurance company.
Right.
They've got a reinsurance market they have to consider. And when you go from 4 years to 2 years, now they can invest knowing, hey, I only have 2 years of exposure here. That helped a lot. Obviously removing a lot of the, being able to sign over your rights. That was a big part of it. A lot of it, and thank you to the Realtors Association. I know the amount of lobbying and just really education that you do in Tallahassee. It's working.
Okay, that is certainly good to hear. Janessa, Trey, I hope you guys are listening to this one. Our efforts are working. Okay.
Yep.
Obviously, in the last month, we've had hurricanes, we've had tornadoes, lots of tornadoes for the first time. I don't ever remember seeing something like that, but really greatly impacted Florida over the course of this summer. So what does that mean for Floridians when it comes to insurance premiums?
Yeah, so those reforms could not have come at a better time, because when you look at the market, at the beginning of this year, I think we were talking about, we had a lot of our carrier partners that they were really not looking to write new business. A lot of your members, audience probably witnessed that. I would say Q2, we started to see the softening of the market, them start coming into the office really wanting to write, and they started to get aggressive. So of course, when these storms hit, taking the people side of it out, I've been to North Carolina, I've been to the West Coast. It's what those people are dealing with is a completely different situation and need to be helped. But as far as the numbers, these carriers don't seem to be impacted. We've had several conference calls with some pretty big companies. They still feel very good. Of course, when January 1 of 25, when their reinsurance rates come out, we'll know for sure. But as far as right now, they're full steam ahead. So, and I think a lot of that really comes from the point that a lot of the flooding doesn't affect them as much, and their bottom line, a lot of that is subsidized. So when we look at the amount of damage that was done, a majority, if not, at least 70% of it was flooding. So it's not impacting them as much as maybe we would thought.
So those are separate flood insurance policies. That's not on your homeowners insurance. That's not on your windstorm protection. That is rising water, separate flood insurance policies.
It. Yeah.
Now, are those, when you said that they're being subsidized, who's subsidizing them?
Federal government. So in the 60s, carriers started to back out and said, look, we cannot insure against these types of events. So FEMA came together. There's a separate fund. They have to go to Congress every few years. So that's all being subsidized. Now, you may have a situation where a property has coverage that will be paid for hurricane and flood. And just like you said, rising water. So when that flood water is recedes, those two adjusters, one from the flood company and one from, let's say, a homeowners or a commercial property carrier, they may come in and they see that high water mark and they say, okay, well, you're in charge from that mark down, that's flood. From that mark up is going to be under their commercial property policy or their homeowners policy.
So one's going to pay for the broken windows, the other one's going to replace pay to replace the drywall and your kitchen cabinets.
You got it. So the lower cabinets and flooring may be covered under the flood policy if they have one, and then the homeowners may be for the roof and some other damage. We had a good friend that had a cabin that was up in North Carolina. He's like, I'm not putting a claim in. There's no way. I don't have flood coverage. I said, well, wait a minute. You need to call the carrier. You need to lean into the people who, your trusted advisors, your agent, and ask them questions, because that roof, some of the other damage that you had could be covered. And it looks like at this point, he is going to get coverage.
Okay, fantastic. It's and I just want to say to everybody who's listening, obviously we are sensitive to everything that has transpired over the course of let's say the last 30 days. It certainly is tragic, and while we're here talking about insurance, please don't take any of this in any way other than us trying to be informative as to what is happening with this insurance market. So talking about when it comes to those insurance premiums, because of all these storms that we've had, should we be ready to, is there going to be a storm of policy increases as far as premiums are concerned because of the hits that they have taken across the state, or do they have a different formula when it comes to
Yeah, I mean, that's not what we're seeing right now. I mean, we had 10 carriers that actually filed this year for just a flat rate. We had 8 that actually had a decrease.
Really?
So that it's been a very, very long time since we've had decreases. And the other thing too is what I think our community needs to understand is that if one large storm comes through, okay, if they have reinsurance, they have one deductible. Okay, so they may not be impacted. The 04-05 storms, why that was such a hard hit on the industry, we had so many storms, and every single time one of those storms made landfall, especially on the the homeowner side, residential, like State Farm is an example. Mother Mutual, that's the reinsurance for State Farm, Florida.
Okay,
they had $1 million per storm. So when you have 11 landfalls every single time, so when you have one large occurrence, we've had a couple events, it's not as impactful as you would think. Now, the reinsurance market, they are going to pick up a majority of that, but there's a lot of other reasons why they've started to come back into the market. And probably don't have time today, but it was a perfect storm in a good way. So you had carriers that were starting to get healthy. You had reform that was done at Tallahassee, and then the reinsurance market. It's all based just like the stock market. It's fear and greed. And they got to a point where the premiums were high enough. They looked at the actuaries and they said, you know what? We want back in.
Okay. And when we're talking about that reinsurance market, my understanding of that is that this is taking place basically outside the U.S. Companies that are buying policies like Lloyd's of London and places in the Caribbean where they're getting the reinsurance from, correct?
Yes. So, but there's a difference between like if a retail client goes and gets a policy directly from Lloyd's of London, compared to the reinsurance. Like we may not see the reinsurance rates of that carrier. As an example, one of our carriers, they said that they actually had a decrease. So they have their costs of doing business, and then their reinsurance. They don't give us those rates. We don't know. Exactly what that cost is.
Included in that policy.
They do. So, and just like any business, is that if your costs go up, let's say, the cost of your rent in an office space goes up, retail, you have a choice to make. And what was happening, through probably the late, I would say 2015, 16, some of the carriers were taking losses, thinking, hey, we'll get through this. But as the reinsurance continued to go up, that's where you started to see carriers pull back and pull out of the market. And for the first time in 2023, I mean, we've had several carriers that actually made a net profit, which sounds crazy. But to go, Citizens in particular went from $2 billion in the red to $700 million in the black. That's a big swing from 22 to 23.
That's huge.
Now, of course, I mean, I'm very aware premiums are very expensive. So hopefully, if we can get some normalcy, we can't have 70% of the litigation in the country be represented here. And in saying that, you have times when you should litigate. I mean, there are times where I tell my client, you need to get a public adjuster. This does not sound right. The carrier, for whatever reason, maybe it's the adjuster, maybe it's a carrier that they have a propensity to decline in those type of situations. That's when you hire a public adjuster. That's when you seek counsel. That's when you move forward. And yes, there are times where litigation is appropriate.
And you had said off camera before we started this podcast that Florida has, 14 point something % of the homes in the country?
Well, property total. Yeah, so homes, commercial, yeah, so 14.9, but we make up over 70% of the litigation.
That's insane. Wow. Yeah. And that's not something new. This has been going on for years.
Yeah, that actually number got better. We used to be 9% of property and over 80% of the litigation. So it is changing. And a lot of that too, it used to be until I want to say it was in the 23 bill, because the 22 and 23, there was some massive legislation.
Right. Assignment of benefits claims.
The assignment of benefits claims. And also too, it had to do with how during mediation, how the attorneys would be paid. It used to be if the carrier, let's say that I say I have a $10,000 loss, and the carrier says no, it's not, let's say they say 10,000, I say 10,001. If I win that case, the carrier has to pay all of my attorney fees, and there was no real set guideline on what they could charge. So what was happening is large bills were being generated. I personally, and I can't speak to every situation, I can only speak to what I see personally. I had a client that, they were actually moving, and we were running all of their information, and I said, hey, can you tell me a little bit about this loss? It was about a $323,000 loss. And they said, I didn't have a $323,000 loss. They got $89,000.
Wow.
The difference was, and look, there could be a lot of things to explain that.
Yeah.
That just goes.
You have no idea how long that litigation went on.
You got it. Exactly right. I mean, that could have been completely understandable.
Yep.
However, that goes to show what the carriers were taking on. So I think that if we can just educate, and obviously why you have this podcast is to really get out there and get the word out so that the realtors can advise their clients, is that when something happens, you call them to put the policy in effect. They are the advisor. They're the ones that are consulting you. Call them first. And I think sometimes what happens is it's a Sunday, or like you can't get a hold of your agent. You can wait a day. I mean, start making repairs, start to protect the property, make sure that there isn't continuous damage that's going to occur. But Monday, call the agent, ask them, hey, what should I do? And then they should be able to advise.
Okay. And let me ask you one off-script question just about Citizens Insurance, because there's a lot of people that Citizens started that depopulation. Mm-hmm. I myself received my letter in the mail saying, hey, we found another insurance carrier for you. And I was shocked, because here I go opening this thing up, and I'm like, oh God, because I hear that it could be up to 20% higher. My insurance was already really high. And what I found out when I opened that piece of mail up was that the policy that they had found for me, apples to apples policy from a different carrier, they're going to take me off Citizens. That policy was far, far cheaper than what I was paying Citizens. So you're in the insurance business. Do you think that the depopulation of Citizens is moving the needle in the right way? Do you think that was a good idea for us to take on?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Well, first of all, if it's within 20%, we don't really have a choice. And I too am being removed from Citizens. So if it's within that 20%, we don't have a choice.
Right.
It will get moved. So what I would tell someone is call your agent, email, whatever, because there's two things to it. One, until you get closer to renewal, you may not know what the rate's going to be. I had a very good friend of mine who's also being taken out from Citizens. His renewal is until June, so we're really not going to know what the true rate is. Now he's being moved as of actually yesterday.
Okay.
So we still have to wait 60 days before the actual renewal to see. The advantage is there are limitations in some of the Citizens coverages. So like liability is an example. You can only purchase up to $100,000 of liability with Citizens. Well, these other carriers let you go up to $300 very easily. So talking to your agent, say, hey, when this happens, when the renewal, I'm still, I know I've transferred over to this company. I know I got to wait till I get a little closer to my renewal. What should I be thinking about? Like before, going up to a 5% hurricane deductible. With Citizens, it made a lot of sense then. Does it still make sense with this new company?
Right.
So those are the questions I think that we need to be asking. Same question that because I'm not the agent of my policy. My mother is at a different agency.
Okay.
And I had to also make that call. Say, look, am I going to be able to do this with the new carrier? And I am. So it's a great question. Maybe they need to do a little bit more research.
Yeah, I think for anybody who's listening right now, I mean, going from 100,000 in liability to 300,000 in liability, in my opinion, is a good idea anyways. I mean, we live in a litigious society, but even going further than that, being in the state of Florida, where there is so much going on as far as litigation is concerned, you definitely want to make sure that you got your bases covered and have a good liability policy for anybody that might be stepping on your property.
Yeah, I mean, it's a requirement for if you have a residential home and you have an umbrella, your requirement by 99% of the carriers out there is that you have 300,000 liability on your home.
Okay.
Now, what happens sometimes that gets missed, and you could have someone who, let's say they were canceled by their carrier, wrote a policy with Citizens, didn't know that, and they have a $200,000 gap between their umbrella policy and what they have with Citizens. So now they can shore that up. Now, there is a policy you can purchase, which I own, that kind of make sure that gap is covered.
Sure.
When I move over to the new company, I'll be able to let that lapse, and I won't need that any longer.
Okay, there you go. So realtors wear many hats to keep their clients up to date on exactly what's happening from contract to close, all the expectations. What are some ways that they should communicate to their clients about insurance to make sure that they are better prepared and not being caught off guard?
The sooner the better. I mean, when I see a transaction go smooth from my end, is that whether it's me or another agent, the sooner that they can get an agent involved. I mean, we know, the amount of work that a realtor does before an insurance person ever even knows that person's buying a home or buying a commercial property, it's immense. I mean, you hear the cases of every now and then, I want to go look at a property, and then they buy it. I mean, it's not common. So when they're going through their inspection period, 7, 10 days, whatever it is, and they're getting their inspections, what I always say, get the wind mitt and 4-point immediately. Yes, great. Your client got a quote. If you have not given the 4-point, if it's needed, and wind mitt to that agent, that quote, it is
not even valid.
Not even valid.
Right.
It's like, in our personal auto, we're used to giving our driver's license, number, and we know they got to check our credit. They got to make sure our driving record. That's exactly the same thing. That home, it's a basic quote based on, basic information. When you
square footage, where it's located.
It's like me getting a quote on a mortgage without giving my social or any of my information. It's not worth. It's throwing darts in the dark.
Well, bringing up mortgages is a super important piece because the insurance rates, with as high as they are these days, that could make or break your mortgage approval.
100%. Yeah, 100%. So that's why and I understand as a realtor, a lot of hats. I was kind of joking with you. You're a psychologist, you're a babysitter, you're doing a lot of stuff. And it makes sense because a home purchase, it's one of the largest financial transactions that a lot of people are going to make. And they're nervous and they're emotional. So you're trying to take some of that emotion out. If you can get the earlier the better before they start to fall in love and they're thinking about where they're going to put certain furniture, and then they drive back through and they're looking at who their neighbors are going to be.
Right.
If you know right away, hey, look, we've looked at 2 homes. This one here, newer roof, AC, no problems, a little bit newer home. I know you love this one, but we need to immediately get to an agent, the wind mitt, the 4-point. Let's get an accurate quote, something that if we said, hey, is this bindable? Do you have enough information? If we needed to, speed up the closing, we could bind tomorrow. That is where I've seen the biggest problems. And I know that one of the things that once we get to that point, let's say we are 30 days before closing, and all of a sudden, person's having a hard time to actually get insurance, our hands are tied in a lot of cases. Now, have I, in the 11th hour, been able to put something together? Absolutely. I don't ever want to risk that. And I know the realtor, they've got a better relationship. They got more vested with that client. They don't want that either. So the earlier that you can get the mortgage broker, get your pre-approvals, get a rate from the agent that is bindable, get it over to mortgage broker. Like you said it. Like, I mean, that mortgage broker, let's say that, that person, they could be, if they're going through a bank, let's say, they could be up in Titusville and they're giving $300 a month, on a $1 million purchase. That's what they're using. Exactly. Next thing you know, that mortgage broker's like, whoa, what do you mean $500 a month? So my goal is always, I want to be done as quickly as I can, whether they choose me or not. I want to get all of my information to them so they can give to the mortgage broker, they can give to the realtor, and they truly are going to know, hey, is this going to be something that we can get to closing, or are we going to find out that we just have a ticking time bomb? And no one wants that.
You don't want to pay for your appraisal, for example, and have that going, and I find out, oh yeah, the property appraised. Well, yeah, but the roof is bad. You don't have hurricane coverage, and your insurance is going to be $12,000 a month. So or $12,000 a year. So at $1,000 a month, you don't even qualify for this property. But meanwhile, you're spending $700 on an appraisal, which makes absolutely no sense. I mean, the quicker that you can get that insurance quote in and make sure that your numbers actually make sense on the loan that you're going for, the better.
Yeah, and the big thing too, like on commercial property, is making sure too that if there is a lender involved, that you're getting a quote for exactly what the lender wants. Let's say that your debt to income is tight. I'm working right now with a client up in Titusville buying a warehouse where they're going to put their AC company in there, and the quotes that they had reflected a lot of business, personal property, and other things that are not related to the loan at all. Because that bank, what do they care about? The brick and mortar.
Right.
They want to make sure that is covered. So I told them that. I said, look,
they're not insuring the content.
They're not. So we had two proposals. I said, look, this is what the bank needs. This is what I recommend. And I don't think he's going to have an issue as far as being able to get the loan, but just being a little bit forward thinking and seeing that and saying, just asking the question, hey, by the way, is there a lender involved? Because I need to know if we've got another individual that's involved in our decision making process. We need to bring that person
to the table,
to the circle.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So let's talk about, we're talking about different types of property, whether that be residential, commercial. Let's talk about homes that are new construction versus the home that's 30 years old. Is there a huge difference when it comes to carriers wanting to insure those two different types of property?
Absolutely. And for two reasons. One, you may not even know, it's not just the rate, what they're going to charge per those two homes, but you may not even have access to 7 or 8 carriers, because we have companies that, I would say up to last year, we'll see if it changes, that they wanted homes that were 1 year or newer. We had some of our carriers that wanted homes that were 10 years or newer. So we're not even talking about the roof. Okay. Now, an agent isn't going to bring up the stuff they can't quote, right? They're just going to send you the quotes that they have access to. So with that newer property, you may have a lot more companies that are now at your disposal that you didn't have. So that could drop the rate. But really, when you look at it, most people that are buying a home, it's carrying costs. Like, what is my monthly rate, right? That's what they want to know. They go to their mortgage broker because they just want to know, hey, what can I afford? What's my monthly nut? Well, if they're buying a newer home, if the cost for the insurance is that much cheaper, they've got more buying power. So instead of, and I don't know the exact numbers, definitely reach out to a mortgage broker to be able to give you exactly how that would convey. However, it could be another $200,000, $150,000 of buying power that maybe you're looking at a home that's older, that's close to the coast, or you have another home that's newer or brand new, that's a little bit inland, maybe more than a mile inland, and those rates could be vastly different.
Okay, interesting. So let's talk about it. Home buyer falls in love with the home, wants to buy it. Everything looks great with the transaction, but then we've got insurance issues. For some reason or another, the home's having a difficult time being insured. What's the next step? They have to have this house. They're having issues with insurance.
They love it.
Like, what are the realistic next steps?
Yeah, so if they've gone the route, let's just say if they've gone the route based on what we're advising, where they actually do get the win mitt, the 4-point early on, you can negotiate. I've seen contracts where I've come in, I said, look, this is a reason you're not getting the hurricane strap discount. When this home was built, let's say it was built in the 90s, or let's say mid-90s.
Sure.
They put hurricane straps on, but there's only 2 nails. one on the front, one on the back side of the strap. If you could get the seller to go in and get a handyman, someone to get up in the attic, someone to get another nail, okay, in that strap, you now qualify for that credit. And what happens is people get hung up on what credit they're getting and not. I say, don't worry about that. It's how many credits are you getting? So as an example, there's more than 5 credits, but let's say there's the 5 bigs.
For credits, just because we use this term a lot in real estate, we're not talking about a credit from the seller. We're talking about roof credits.
Yeah, we're talking about wind mitigation inspection has been done,
right?
And now they're going to give you a discount on your homeowners or commercial property policy. You're going to see a reduction because the exposure of that and the hazard of that property is less. So in that case where I see that all they need to do is put another nail in the hurricane strap, if they had 2 out of the 5 main credits and getting that third, what happens is the rate, when you have 1 credit, it's like a roller coaster. It goes up. 2, the sweet spot is once you hit 3, it's like a drop in the premium.
Oh, really?
You know, and what happens sometimes is once you get to about 4 out of the 5, and there's more, there's 9 questions, but I'm just giving you the 5 main. Once you get 4 out of 5, you've already hit about 80 to 90% of the available credits. So sometimes
interesting.
I would have a client call and they say, hey, I went ahead and replaced all of my windows with high impact. I got that final credit, $100 a year savings. And they're like, I don't understand. And that's a hard conversation to have. So believe me,
you told me to put the windows.
So I make sure I say, so I always tell my clients, like, before you do anything, call me. I know good clients, they want to protect your time. But that's what we're here for.
I mean, it's easy for you to run a scenario.
Or even just a quick conversation. I can pull up, their inspection and say, look, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you're getting 4 of the 5. It's not going to be as large of a savings as you thought. Sure. When my neighbor across the street, they got their windows replaced and they saved $3,000 a year.
But maybe
what
they had
didn't
nothing.
know is they had 2 or 1 of the 5.
Right.
And that was what got them closer, not the actual credit specifically, but it was the amount of credits that they now were getting. Because a carrier, to break it down very simple, they either really want it, they're not really sure, they really don't, okay? So once you get out of 3 out of 5, they're now, okay, yeah, this is maybe a risk that we want to take on. If there's no credits, there's nothing there, and some of them are very easy to obtain. Some are as simple as, the client, they've got one of those moon shape, windows above their door.
Okay, yeah.
And it's not covered, and they just need to put so of course, you never want to advise your client to invest into a home that they haven't closed on. However, if you can negotiate and get the seller, say, hey, look, we love this house. This is the one. We're
Sure.
sold. This is the house we want. However, we're hearing from the big bad insurance guy that moon, that needs to be covered with a high impact rated. And then all of a sudden the rate seems to come into focus.
Sure.
So that
guys, Jim is not the big bad insurance guy. He's here to help you.
I'll take those bullets. I'll take those rounds for my industry because there are some things that we deserve. I mean, there's some things that I've seen that we shouldn't be proud of. There's things that should have been done sooner. I think that now things are changing though. So I'm excited for that.
Well, that's good to hear. Certainly, we could use all the help that we can get as far as affordability is concerned here in Florida. That's for everybody. I mean, across the board, we've got people that live on the beach and they can afford $25 million homes, but the majority of Floridians are those people that are working in the beach shops and the bars and restaurants that we like to frequent. And it's really hard for those people to break into the real estate market and start creating some generational wealth for their families.
Yeah.
So any place where we can get a little bit of relief in those numbers is certainly welcomed here.
I agree.
I am going to open up the floor to you. If there's anything that you know about insurance that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with our people, otherwise then we'll get to our last question that I like to ask of all of our guests.
Yeah, I think that you really find a broker you trust. And it doesn't always mean that broker is going to have the answer every time. This gentleman I'm working with in Titusville, he has an agent up in that area. And as we discussed, I said, look, if I come back and I'm providing the same solution that this person is, and you trust them and you have a relationship with that person, it is easier when it's, right there in your town. A major storm comes through, you just drive there. No phones, no problem. So find an agent like that. There's a lot of them. I'm not the only one, obviously. There's a lot of good agents out there. Get an agent who is not just an order taker, and it's hard. I'm not. We all do it. Okay, we're very, very busy. Client calls in, says that I want to make this change, and they just do it. Really find someone that you can really have a conversation with, and because there's a lot of ways that we can get creative. Like this specific one, he's paying cash for this property. And I asked him, I said, it's a commercial building. I said, has anyone talked to you about the building itself not covering the wind? So we're going to do everything but wind on the shell, because he has a separate LLC that owns the building. He's going to be leasing it to his AC company.
Okay.
Well, the AC company, we can do a tenant policy with wind. So it's a lot cheaper. So yes, is he taking on, self-insuring that wind exposure for the shell? Absolutely. It's a warehouse. It needs a newer roof anyway. The roof is 20 years old. He's like, I'm going to replace it anyway. So here we're giving him for all the stuff inside, the drywall, all the desks and all the things that are actually the build out is going to be covered under his tenant policy. But then the landlord, stuff. Exactly. So those are just little things, that you want to know, that when you call, I know whether it's an accountant or even your realtor, can you imagine that you hear from a friend that you get referred to and say, yeah, every time I call him, like he only has a couple minutes for me, doesn't really want to spend time, and hasn't take me out. It's like, well, why are you still using that person?
Right.
And interview an agent. I've had several clients say, I would like to come in and interview you. I'm like, awesome. This is going to, I'm definitely, he or she's going to be a client of mine, and they're going to be a long-term client, because when you find an agent who wants to educate, they want to help the client. They really want, because it's better for all of us. It's better.
Same thing in real estate.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Awesome. So one thing that you just reminded me of, a question that I was going to ask you before I let you go here now, because you did mention commercial, and we talked about the condos. And right now there's this phenomenon that's happening where some condo buildings are getting their insurance renewals, and they're saying, we're not willing to give you any less than a 10% deductible, a 7% deductible, but you've got Fannie and Freddie that are saying, we're not willing to insure this property mortgage-wise. We're not willing to lend on this property unless that commercial insurance for that entire condo building has got a 5% or less deductible.
Yeah.
But they're offering fewer and fewer and fewer of those 5% or less policies. So what is sort of the trend there? And do you see any sort of relief coming that those buildings are going to be able to get those lower deductibles?
Yeah, great question. It's happening a lot. So we started to see that. It's only really been a thing the last 3 or 4 years, but it has to do with the roof. I know we were talking about that. So when you have a building that isn't as favorable to a underwriter, there's a lot of different things they can do. They can either go from replacement costs, how they're going to cover it at claim time on the roof. They can do actual cash value. That's something that I really recommend, that whether it's a realtor, whether it's a client, everyone needs to understand the difference between what is replacement cost and what is actual cash value. The challenge is that a lot of homeowners spend more time knowing about that TV that's hanging on their wall than the thing that's holding up that TV.
Right, exactly.
So do a little bit of research, find out. So we started to see a lot of these condo associations, as the premiums got so high, there's a few ways that a company can try to bring the rate down, or say, okay, we'll write this, but we don't like it, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to increase that deductible. I've had, on the residential side, I've had deals that couldn't go through because exactly what you said. That is a guideline, for Freddie. Like, right. It has to meet no more than 5%, and there's not much you can do. So as the association goes, and I think they're getting that information, maybe they're not, as you were alluding to. Maybe I need to do a better job, and our team in Jupiter needs to do a better job of, I can tell you that if you talk to a couple of our producers in Jupiter that are condo experts, that's all they do. You ask them anything else but condo, you're speaking another language. You truly, really, really good.
It's a niche market.
It is niche, and that's it. I mean, you want to be an inch wide, mile deep, because it's important. So in those markets, they're working to get the new roofs, and that's where maybe when we're looking at reform, like, what can we do as we move forward? The state is doing a lot of things that they think are appropriate. how can we? I know right now I was just reading, this week that they're considering loosening up some of the guidelines on who can actually install like those hurricane straps we were talking about.
Okay.
In the past, I mean, that's a structural, component.
Licensed roofing contractor only.
Well, or a contractor that has a structural, ability. So that's something that if they were to allow just a roofer who doesn't have that criteria, but to go ahead and put those straps in, I mean, yes, can you have roofers who don't put in exactly the way? I'm sure, and an engineer could speak more to that, but it's a lot better than not having anything at all.
Right.
And so we would see it is very apparent after a storm hits which homes were protected, because it's the shell. Like the only reason, a lot of people don't know this, maybe this is one thing I can add, the only reason they care about windows is because they don't want the roof to come off. That has nothing to do with water coming in and damaging your carpet or one bedroom.
No, your front door blows open, the pressure changes, the roof's gone.
That's exactly right. So everything has to do with that roof. If that roof can stay on, then they know for the most part. Now, tornadoes, I mean, it's rare.
Different story.
We can't insure against anomalies, or things are out of, we talk about like on the work comp side, it's a shock loss. Like this thing happened, it's not normal, it's out of scope of the actual client, and you don't get penalized as much. It's those ongoing things that we have to try to manage. So the tornado situation, it's wind related. So in the case of the gentleman that if he decides to go without wind on that building in Titusville, it's not just hurricane, it's all wind. Okay. So I know we focus on hurricane, but there's a lot of wind events. So last year we had 26 events that were $1 billion each. Only two were, one was a hurricane, one was a typhoon. So out of the 26 events last year that were at least $1 billion each, two were a type of event that we normally think about. Obviously what's happened in North Carolina, I believe that opened up our eyes a little bit more to really what moving water can do, right. Unfortunately.
Yeah, they say it's not, it doesn't matter where you live, you are never 100% safe from moving water. It's just a matter of when the flood would happen.
Yeah, and it's not to scare people. I mean, there are types of products or insurance that I'll tell people, I don't think you need that as much as you need this thing. So what I would do, rather than when I'm sitting down or asking an agent, or if I'm a realtor, I'm trying to interview a couple agents to kind of see, and use 2 or 3. I've never, anytime a realtor that I've done a lot of business with, and maybe they moved to a different group, or if it's a mortgage broker who maybe said, hey, new laws are coming down, I have to please, I would love to be the last look just to make sure. Okay.
Sure.
But Kin was a big thing 3 years ago. And I would look at Kin's policies and their rates, and I'm like, do that. I don't have access to them, but that, from what I'm seeing, I can't touch that. I said, can I call you in 9 months? And I'd love to be able to earn the business back. Now, Kin, we found out, wasn't doing their rates. It was naive. They were ignorant, they weren't trying to be dishonest. They just thought they could come in at a much lower rate. So they had to make some adjustments. Now they're a little bit more, a little bit closer to the marketplace. But
sure.
A good agent doesn't mind you using 2 or 3 people. Just lean on them. In that moment when you really are trying to decide, and an honest agent will say, "Hey, that's a good program. Maybe you should do that."
So one last question that we like to ask all the guests on the show.
Okay.
South Florida has many hidden gems, whether it be restaurant, beach, hiking spot, dive bar. Why don't you tell us your favorite hidden gem that you'd like to share?
Captain Charlie's Reef Grill. People, when you first walk up to it, you would never think that type of food would be served. But
okay.
I think for me, my wife and I, we've been married now 14 years.
Okay.
As of June, and so that was our first date. So I'm a little biased, I guess.
I remember that one.
I remember that one.
Yeah.
And it was funny. So for our 10-year anniversary, we went back, and it was hilarious. We're sitting there. We brought in a bottle of Vouv. They did. It was a corking fee, and here's a candle with a fake leaf with like a fake drop on it, and we're like, this is perfect. And a Bud Light,
Yeah.
bucket with Vouv.
Yeah.
So no, we're very much. there's so many amazing restaurants that are high end, that are beautiful. And then there's these little spots that you would never think, but you're welcome, open arms, and great food. And Florida has a lot to offer.
They sure do.
No reason. It's no surprise why a lot of people are moving here.
Okay, fantastic. We got to check out Captain Charlie's.
Yeah,
Captain
Reef
Charlie's
Grill to the locals.
Okay, Reef Grill sounds fantastic. Where's that at? Up in Jupiter?
Yeah, it's on A1A in between Gardens, like Juneau.
Okay, Juneau Beach. Well, you guys heard it right there from Mr. Jim King. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. Lots of fantastic information that you shared with our viewers. And we will see you guys all right back here next time, next Friday, 8 a.m. RWorld Talk. Thank you.